One of the challenges I had when setting up my sawmill originally was learning how to get the sawmill aligned. So today we were sawing the pine that you see behind us. We got some fairly good sized pine logs, and the saw just would not saw. I mean, it was making wedges. It was just awful, and we said, okay, forget it. We're not going to saw anymore. Let's stop, figure out what the problem is. So I got to thinking, well, maybe, a lot of people haven't, maybe you've got a, sawmill out there that you don't know how to align, and so I thought I would walk through the steps on what to do to align the sawmill. So one of the first steps in aligning a circle mill is to loosen, if you have a third bearing, take the shims and everything out from under the third bearing and loosen the belts. You can see that I've taken the belt that runs the chain drag off. I have also removed the jack that tensions the belts on the engine, and I've removed all the slack from the engine. You don't want anything pulling on the shaft to be able to knock it, artificially knock it out of alignment. You want those things hooked back up once everything's aligned. So the first step in aligning a circle mill is to check the track to make sure that the track is completely level, the whole full run. So I have put a transit on this that we have. It's a laser type transit, and checked, and it's fairly close. It showed that down here on the end that we were a little off. And so what I did to confirm that is I took a level and put it on the carriage and ran that carriage all the way down. As you can see, it's a little off level as the transit predicted down on this end, although it shows level on the other end. That's basically a small twist in the track. As it passes the saw, we want to take that out. We'll shim that up to get rid of that so that I can do the get the track completely level. In addition to leveling the track, you also want to make sure it's straight. Mine being steel, I don't have that issue that bad, but if you've got a wood track and a wood carriage, you want to make sure that the track stays straight. You can do that by pulling a string from one end to the other and then aligning it to that string. The easiest way to do that would be put jack bolts on both sides of the track so that you could easily adjust it, maybe pushing against a piece of steel or something at each one of the posts. The other thing you want to do is make sure that the axles are aligned on the carriage. The way to do that is to measure between the front wheel and the carriage, and then measure from the back side of the back wheel to the carriage. Make sure those two distances are equal, then pull a string between the two of them and align the two center wheels. If the axles float, now mine were the old style with the Hyatt roller bearings, and I'll show that right here. These are my old axles with the roller bearings, and what I found was that those things were letting the wheels move side to side, and that's what eventually ended up me hanging the saw and damaging the shaft, was because of the top bearings these were. So I upgraded to the new style wheels that are independent of one another. This is a solid axle, it doesn't move, and these have bearings much like a taper bearing, much like a car does. So that's what solved my problem as to preventing the carriage from moving back and forth. This is the Bosch Transit that I used, or it's kind of a laser level to figure out the elevation or the levelness of the track. So luckily I didn't have to buy this. My office has it, and so nobody's there. It's on a Saturday, so I went up there and grabbed it real quick. And like I said, it confirmed that everything was level except for this one end down here of the track, and then also the level confirmed that as well. So now what I'll do is, you can see I've got a jack positioned underneath the track. I'll jack that up till the level gets straight, and I'll shim it with some wood shims, tighten it back down, and then confirm by pushing the carriage the full length with the level on it to make sure the carriage itself is level with the track as it goes down the track. So now I've got the carriage pulled all the way back to the backstop, and you can see that it's not dead on level, but it's close, and the key thing is it's consistent through the whole run. So I'm going to push the carriage down to the saw and then check it again. Okay, so now I'm up at the saw. Again, I've got the level where it's not quite on level. It's a little high on the saw side, but it is consistent down the full length of the saw. What I'll do is to take the rest of it out is I'll actually shim the head blocks. The key thing we're trying to do is make sure that the ways right there that the L's sit on top of are level going down the whole run, and so I'll double check that. Now, if you have a wooden husk frame that's not physically attached to the track, you have to adjust that as well. Mine is connected through a big beam. Now when I level the track, I also shoot the end of that beam just to make sure that it's all level all the way across, and it was. Everything was square, so based on the transit. And then, like I said, the level is just showing that I'm off just a hair. Now, what I didn't want to have to do is jack up the entire track on this side and shim this entire side to try to get that little bit out when I can adjust the head blocks just a little bit. As you can see right here near the head saw, I added a small shim there, and I added a small shim right under there at the head saw. Added one there, and the one that made the most amount of difference is I added one down here. And by the time you get to this location, you've passed the saw. If you look back here, you can see there's the back of the saw blade. Your carriage will have passed the saw, and you should be in the clear. I have passed the saw, so I'm all the way down at the location where the off bearer would normally get the wood off. You can see that again, I'm not quite exactly level. I'm a little on the high side toward the saw, but I'm consistent the entire way down. So now what I will do is, you can see I've got these pieces of board that I bolt into place. That's what holds the track down. I had loosened all that up only on this outside so that the track didn't shift at all. It's pinched on the saw side. Now I'll go back through and tighten all those up, and then I'll start checking level on the ways themselves. So up here on the ways, I'm going to check for level. I'm good and level at this location, and what I've done is I've moved the way right to the saw. I know that if it's level here, it's going to be level the entire run because I already put the level on the carriage, ran it the whole way, and it's staying consistent. So if this was not level, I would either unbolt here and shim, or unbolt back here in the back and shim. Now your sawmill may be a little bit different, but there's usually a way to get shims in there. This isn't building a rocket, so use shims. I've got metal shims for where it's metal on metal. I usually saw oak, white oak shims for under the track. So by hand, I'm simply pushing the carriage back and forth, and I'm expecting all of them to be level because I had shimmed them before. This is the third head block. It is level. Now I'll push the carriage back and go to the second and the first and check both of those. What I found on the front head block and the second one is that the back side is a little bit on the high side. So you can see there's a couple shims under there. However, I can't take those out because it'll hit the bar on the back. So I'm always a proponent of taking shims out rather than adding shims when I can. But in this case, I'm going to have to add shims here to the front side. So I've got a set of shims of different sizes all laid out. These are stainless steel kind of pump shims that I bought from that you can get from McMaster-Carr, and I get them in various sizes, and they're very valuable to have around a sawmill to be able to do more precision leveling like with the head blocks. Again, I'm going back on what I said. It's not rocket science, but you got to have it close. You got to have all of them the same, or it'll never saw correctly. Well, as you can see from the skies, thunderstorms rolling in. It's starting to get dark, so I'm gonna lose my light here shortly. I did get the head blocks all leveled up, and then the next test I'm going to do is just to see how close the saw is compared to the compared to the head blocks. This is just a quick test to see how close we are to square with the head blocks. You can see from where this level or this machine square is that we're way off. So this is the source of what our problems are. Checking the saw over, we had a bolt, the bolt that holds, there's the saw bearing. There's a bolt that goes all the way through that piece of tube steel that holds that down. That came loose a couple of weeks ago, and we tightened it up because we were in the middle of sawing and I didn't realize it. What has happened is the shims all fell out when that thing got loose and was bouncing. So now I think that the saw is not square. So the real test is to put the machine level on the shaft itself and look at it from that perspective. Getting harder and harder to see as I'm losing the light, but you can definitely see from the level that the mandrel is not level. And so that's the source of our problem. That's why we're sawing wedges. We're not square to the carriage. So the next thing will be to do is loosen this. Let me back out and get some light. I'll loosen that bearing housing up, and then we will shim it to get that shaft level, which will then level the saw with the carriage. This bolt that is holding that bearing on being loose and the shim shaking out, well, I decided then to check the other bearings last night after it got, or the other bolts on the carriage after it got dark. I found out that my third axle was completely loose. You could pull the bolts out by hand. All the head blocks were loose, and all the axles were somewhat loose. So made it a point last night to tighten everything up. So I think it's just going to be a standard thing that over time I'm just going to go through and tighten everything back up again. So that's probably contributing to some of the issues I was having as well. Last night it got too dark on me, but what I did, and it's getting dark again because of thunderstorms, what I did was I had an extra set of shims in that rear bearing. I went ahead and took those out. There's a set of shims that are the minimal to give you enough room to tighten the bolt on the bottom. Those are left in. So now I'll shim the front up. So that bearing has been shimmed and locked back down again. I will do this rear bearing last once I get the front bearing shimmed, get everything leveled up, and then set the lead. When I set the lead, you want the rear bearing, or the middle bearing there, tightened down, the rear bearing loose, and then adjust the front bearing only once I do that. And I'll go into that in more detail once I get to that point. The next thing I'm doing is setting the lead on the saw. We want the front end of the saw to be about 1/32 or a 1/16 of an inch closer to the front, to the head block, than the rear. What this does is it keeps the saw from walking out of the log as it's sawing. If it's parallel, it'll walk out of the log as you saw. And it also keeps that back edge from rubbing against the cant or the wood as you're sawing. Now this is different for every sawmill. This setting is not a setting that you fix and walk away. It's trial and error. I know from this experience with this saw is that it likes between 1/32 and a 1/16 of an inch of lead. And so remember, I have taken all this stuff apart, so I want to check that to see where we're at on lead. Now I have measured to the face of the head block. We're 14 1/4 inches to the face of the head block. I have marked this tooth, and to check the lead, I'll rotate the saw backwards to that tooth again and then check it on the back side. So I'm back here at the back of the saw. I've got my saw rotated and got the tooth set up. I'm going to measure again. Remember, I was 14 1/4 at the front. I'm right at 14 and maybe just a hair under a 1/16. So I'm kind of not 1/32 but not quite 1/16. I know this saws good at that location, so I'm not going to change that. So it looks like I did not have much issue when I moved everything. Now, if I was going to change lead, what I would do is I would loosen the saw bearing. I would loosen the end bearing if I've got a third bearing that's over there, and completely disconnect it. I would make sure that my belts are all loose, and then I would only loosen one side of the center bearing so that I wouldn't pinch or bind that. Then I would make my adjustment in lead. There's 2 adjustment feeds there side to side. I would make my adjustment for lead there, checking it front and back again. One of the things you would do while you're doing this setup is to check the collars to make sure the collars are good. I did not do that because mine are new. If you're curious about how to do that, how to check those, there is a book called Circular Sawmills and Their Efficient Operation that's on PDF online. It tells you step by step how to do that. Also, when you're doing the lead, checking the lead, you want to make sure that your guide pins are well away from the saw. Whenever you get ready to start sawing though, those guide pins want to be right up against the saw, not touching, but very close, and you set those while the saw is running. So I'll do that before I put the platform back up. The next step we're going to do is the last thing is to align each one of the L's on the head block to the saw. I'll start with the first one, I'll take a measurement, and then all I'll do is go down to each subsequent head block, and I'll make sure that each one of those L's is the same distance from the saw. What you want to do before you do that test though is you want to physically push on each one of those L's and make sure that they are as far back as they will go. If they're forward for some reason, it's going to throw everything off on you. So I am having to adjust each one of these. One of the ways I like to make sure that I keep it forward is I put a crescent wrench up here in the tooth and pull that rack gear back, if you can see that. And then as I've got that held back, I shift that L forward while holding this in place. Shift the L forward past the point that I want to adjust it to, and then as I push back on it, there's no risk of this rack going forward on me. So that's just one of the techniques that I use to do that. I set and checked every one of the head blocks to the front one. So I adjusted the distance to the front one, and then I made all the rest of them match. I did have to make slight adjustments on each one of them. Then to test to make sure that I had it correct, I advanced the set works a couple of inches, then pushed the carriage back and forth and remeasured to the saw blade, and I had all 4 head blocks came up the same distance. So that would signify success, is that I got that all aligned. So the next step is to put all the belts back on, get those tightened up, get the platform over the mandrel, and then we will do a test run of sawing. The alignment definitely corrected the problems that we were having. The mandrel probably being the most likely culprit, that it was out of level. We sawed 3 logs today, got some nice 2x8s and 2x4s, everything true 2-inch, 4-inch. There wasn't any wedges. We didn't have any single board that was a wedge today. So definitely the saw needed an alignment. The axles being loose and then the mandrel out of square was probably the most likely culprits to all the issues we were having. Hopefully this video has been helpful if you've got an old circle mill that you are trying to set up. This basically covers the alignment procedure. This didn't cover, all these problems associated with bad mandrel bearings, bad collars, or maybe bad axle bearings, but because those issues cause major problems in operation of the sawmill. But hopefully this alignment procedure would help you set it up to where you at least rule out alignment as being the culprit as to why it wouldn't saw correctly. So I hope this video helps. We are done for the day. We're going to get back to sawing the rest of this pine here soon and try to finish this job up.